everyone.
Good
It is
morning.
time for some fun. Start the week off strong, learning, having some fun, asking some good questions. So, welcome everyone. I think we'll get started in a minute, but I can just give a quick introduction. So, my name is Philip. I'm the CMO here at Eskimi, and I am joined by Marcel Sandoval, who is our Chief Product Officer. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the world of contextual and how we see the future and what options are available. Um, it's going to be fun. And what we'll end up with, it's going to be a quick one. It's only going to be 25 minutes. So at the end, we'll have room for a 5 minutes Q&A. So what you can do here is also ask the questions in the chat, and we will be able to ask them at the end. So yeah, what we'll do is we'll wait 10 seconds. So we give people the 2-minute mark. And what we'll start with is just asking a little bit of a poll. So you can ask, so we can know a little bit about where you are today. So I will share that now. And please feel free to put that in, just so we have a little bit more context, no pun intended, on where you are with contextual. Good. And we see it popping in. Good. So when that populates, I could just share my screen. There we go. Good to see some good results overall. People are using it, so that's nice. Plopping up. Good. Yeah, so most of us here are, of course, well-seasoned marketers and advertisers, but for those that aren't, I think this should also be very interesting for you guys to see. So today we're going to talk about the future of contextual targeting in AI, and we'll go through a little bit about why we should do that, of course, the power of relevance. What are some of the market gaps and opportunities we see, and hopefully you also see, the AI revolution, and some actionable strategy for you guys to also implement after this webinar. And we'll end with a nice Q&A, so bring your good questions here. So relevance is a competitive advantage, right? So we see a lot of these new movements in the markets and a lot of fun actions being done for targeting for audiences. But when it comes to relevance and attention, it is becoming more of a competitive advantage because it's all happening. The loss of cookies, behavioral targeting, and all of these things. So relevance is becoming an even more sought after commodity. And yeah, Marcel, maybe you have some good insights into this one. I think this is what you framed. It might be we stole it from someone, but
Yeah, I think in the end, when we have evolved into programmatic in the past 10, 15 years, a lot of new things came to happen, a lot of new capabilities, but in the end, the core of what we're trying to do with advertising, whether it's digital, whether it's non-digital or programmatic or not, in the end, advertising is really about showing the right ad, and that can mean not just the right message, but also the right visual elements and the right interactions, which we're big advocates for in Eskimi, to the right person, which of course with the rise and fall of the cookie and all of the addressability allowed us very, very granular ways of finding the right audience, the right interest, etc., but also the right time, right? And what that looks like in digital is really contextual, because the content that the user is reading at that moment can tell you a bit more about what type of mindset they are, what type of topic they are willing to pay attention to. I always say we have multiple interests, right, as humans, and a lot of the people here probably spend a lot of their time consuming content about advertising, about marketing, etc. But you also have your own personal hobbies. For example, I really like football, and so if I am reading about the latest news in the cookie deprecation, for example, as I think a lot of us spend time doing, and I see an ad about football, it's probably not the right time for me. It's probably not the right time where I will be most engaged. But if I see an ad when I am checking out the latest score results from last weekend, that is a time where I will be more engaged with that type of topic and then higher impact, right? So in the end, right ad, right person, right time. Time in digital and programmatic really translates into contextual.
Yeah, and I think the future of targeting isn't about the person, right? It's about the moment. And I think that's really where the mindset needs to be shifting across, right? I think that's where we're going with this, and we'll share a little bit more about like the moment a little bit later on, what's possible here. So we promised a little bit of results. Why? Of course, relevance is key, and context is there. And we just see from studies done by IAS and Toby, a big eye track provider, is that we see a lot more focus on the performance end. Of course, right? This is everything is a performance play in the end for us. But looking at it from a holistic perspective, right? We just know that when we see an ad in the right context, we have a lot better chance of getting people to actually recall it or feel the moment, right? So endemically matched ads, right, matching with the feeling there, we just see 20%. And of course, revenue is important, right? So 14% is the stat so far, and attention, which has been this year has been one of our key focus areas, because we just know that this is what's working, right? So viewability is a metric from the 2010s, but now we're going a little bit more further into the future, and here we just see attention with the highest correlation also to purchase intent, brand recall, etc. And here contextual is also a strategy that helps with that. So it's not only the creative, but it's also the moment. And it wouldn't be a webinar without a little bit of a history lesson as well. So Marcel, do you have some cool fun facts about early 1990s up to now? What's happening?
Yeah, so I think to your point, it's very important to understand where you come from, to understand why you got where you are, and what are some of the problems that you were trying to solve along the way. And in the world of programmatic, in the world of digital advertising, early on there wasn't a lot of targeting, right? So the digital business was based on bookings with publishers, big publisher names that you would agree on a certain amount of impressions with at a certain price. But especially news publishers, they have a very large variety of content, and because news publishers specifically react to real world events, that also makes them quite unpredictable in a lot of ways. So a lot of that is still happening. A lot of that is still needed because of the way premium inventory is transacted. But when we started moving to a more programmatic world, cookies allowed us to do a lot of advanced targeting on the users. So, building up profiles related to their interests, related to their patterns across the internet. And that, because it was very new and because it was very, very powerful and a way to more effectively spend your advertising dollars, it was quite attractive. But then GDPR especially kicked off a set of privacy regulations that spilled over many other parts of the world. But then also cookie deprecation announcement, even though it didn't happen in the end. But what I would, more generically call the fading of identity signals, because also Apple is following this trend. Safari doesn't have identifiers for users. That forced us as an industry to think of, what other signals could we use to serve more relevant ads, which, as we were saying, is the ultimate goal of advertising. And a lot of the technological advancements that were developed during the cookie targeting or the behavior targeting rise were very relevant for contextual, because it allowed to find much more granularly what were the relevant pieces of content, what were the relevant keywords and topics that you might want to advertise against.
Yeah, and we
And it
saw
was
a whole new industry, right, coming up from this privacy backlash, right? And again, looking at the GDPR, looking at CCPA, like IDFA, right? A lot of it is still moving, and I think we now see a new industry booming again, which is fun. Like, where contextual is researching, which is very interesting for many that don't have access to all that data, and the bigger suppliers supply it, right? So it's moving again, which is amazing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the end, I think talking about AI, and probably anyone that opens LinkedIn, 9 out of 10 posts will talk about AI. We like to think of AI not as a product in itself, but more as a tool that allows us to solve problems in a better way. And that's what generative AI has brought specifically to the contextual space, because earlier solutions were, they were evolving over time, but a lot of them we're overly reliant on simple things like keywords, simple things like language or topics, and in the end, context can be much more complex. But as humans, if you read a piece of content, if you read a website, an article, you are able to make that judgment call, that decision of whether that's a piece of content that's relevant for your brand and for the marketer that you're trying to expose. And that's something that AI allows us to do at scale. So it brings that semantic analysis like humans would. But of course, we see millions of different URLs per day, so it's not reasonable to expect to manually classify those, and it's always changing. So AI allows us to bring that human-like semantic analysis, but to the vast, the vast amount of content that is generated every day.
Yeah, I think doing that at human scale, we would need a couple of 100,000 people sitting doing that manually every day, right? So speaking a little bit about the tools, right? So we have recently introduced DeepContext, which is part of the AI package, but of course there are always other players in this field, right? So no reason to leave them out here, I think. So how did Eskimi DeepContext come about? And can you tell a little bit about what it is? We'll talk about that afterwards as well.
Yeah, and to your point, it's very important to highlight that this is not, it's not necessarily a crazy idea that we had. It's a trend, right? And of course, we were maybe lucky enough to be at the forefront of this trend, but it also validates the fact that others are doing similar. It validates that we're onto something that has potential, especially at Eskimi, since we focus on high growth markets. Seeing that this is also happening in other markets validates what we're doing, and also puts us in the opportunity to maybe even bring solutions from high growth markets to more sophisticated markets, rather than the other way around, how it usually works. So we came, yeah.
No, go ahead. I think this has been overall our strategy for many years, right? Democratizing ad tech access to this, right? But I think this is changing. I think one of these tools is that AI allows this democratization again. I like the word. It was a big hit work in the 2010s, but I think this is really important that this allows us, and as you talked about, we're in growth markets, right? So not a lot of the bigger solutions are available in those markets, right? So there's lots of regional things in terms of language barriers that not all these tools, legacy tools, will capture, right? And that's quite important. I'm sitting in Denmark, right? So a mature market per se, right? But not all solutions fit in with us, right? So I think that's important.
And that's exactly what took us in this journey, because these companies, from what I know, of course, I'm not part of their team, so I don't know what was their journey, but our journey came from the lack of existing solutions. Even with the, let's say, more rudimentary contextual solutions, there just wasn't enough good coverage in high growth markets. A lot of the global players that offer contextual solutions, they focus on 10 to 12 different countries, of course, US, UK, Germany, maybe Japan, maybe Korea, but the core of where we work in Eastern Europe, in Africa, and Southeast Asia, there were big gaps in the market. And as Eskimi usually does, we have two alternatives: either wait for someone to occupy that space or build our own in order to meet the client's needs, right? And those client needs, as you were mentioning, a lot of it revolves around the language and around the local contextual relevance, pun intended, because there are hundreds and probably thousands of different languages, and most of the solutions that claim to be global really work on 10, 15 really well, maybe another 30, 40 not so well, and then the rest are really more of an afterthought. And for us, that was very important, because we are all about bringing those powerful digital solutions into these markets. And if you're not able to function in the local language, there's not even a conversation to start, right? All of these other players, Scope 3, approach it from a more agentic angle, where it's more about leveraging AI to take all of the decisions, which valid use case for sure. And then RTB House, being a retargeting company, is focusing more on intent, which again, very, very important use case. But for us, it's really about in the journey of trying to make something that is relatively not simple, but relatively commoditized in other markets, we ran into something that was very powerful and that could even, be better than some of the existing solutions, even in those sophisticated markets.
Yeah. So let's maybe talk a little bit about DeepContext, right? Just a little bit more in granular how it works, what it does. It's not a sales pitch. I think it's one of those things that this should be the beacon of what the future should look like for Contextual. Right? We're just getting started, but maybe you can talk a little bit about what it actually does and how it works.
Yeah. So before talking about DeepContext, one of the important things that we realized while building this product was that brands and agencies often worked with one provider for brand safety, and then they work with different providers for doing contextual audiences. But in the end, those two things are based on those two decisions are made on the same thing, which is the content of the website. And that often that usage of different vendors creates a lot of conflict and creates a lot of uncertainty of why am I not being able to serve in this publisher or that piece of content. And so we created the concept of brand blueprint. And a brand blueprint is essentially a unified content strategy where you go beyond what's acceptable, which is that brand safety piece, and move into what's desirable from a content perspective. And you can do that way beyond the main signals that you might use with your existing contextual providers. So if you think about contextual, I think everyone's mind jumps directly to three things: brand safety, keyword targeting, and then categories, right? So of course, all of those things are well covered by a product, but you can go way beyond that and be as granular or as generic, of course, as you want. So you can focus on things like the sentiment or the tone of voice of the article. So imagine you want to focus on educational type of content or, opinion pieces, that type of nuance we are able to decision on. Things like, of course, the language, as I was mentioning before, is super important. So it's not taking out some of those foundational things, which are still very important, but enhancing those things. And what it ends up looking like is really, if I had to limit it to one sentence, it's prompt-based targeting, right? So in the end, you describe in human language what you want and what you don't want. A lot of the issues we were trying to solve is that rigidness when you work with a, let's say, catalog-based vendor where you maybe have 25 options and you have to find the closest things. We wanted to open it up so that the brands can tell us exactly what they want, because everyone already has had this exercise of, requirements from a brand perspective, marketing strategies, and it's just applying that to digital content and to web content to find the right one. And that is just a blank canvas, right? So it's really powerful.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it also elevates the conversation, right? It elevates it to being in the moment and the relevance, and it takes a strategic initiative, right? So a lot of the big brands, global brands, have these initiatives and they have these mandates, right? Especially those that work within sensitive categories, they have a lot more non-flexible ways of working with this. So I think this is a way for us to go beyond brand safety measurements as well, right? We have some clients that have thousands of keywords in them that might not help them get this incremental reach that a lot of them are asking about, right? So maybe we have an example here that we can actually do and talk about, which is Louis Vuitton.
Yeah, so the way the system actually works, so once you have that brand blueprint, which is a human language definition of what content is desirable for your brand, what our system does is it starts evaluating all of the website traffic that we see with advertising opportunities into whether it matches your requirements or it doesn't match your requirement. And this is super important because, especially speaking of AI, there's so much new content being generated every day, and having that certainty that you have defined the rules in a way that any new content will be filtered and only the one that matches your requirements will be done. And we do this in relatively near time, so it takes a couple of minutes from seeing an article for the first time until it's classified. It's super important, and that scale allows us to find examples like this where if you were doing a audience for, let's say, a luxury brand, focus on luxury lifestyles, luxury dining, luxury shopping, etc., etc., any keyword-based strategy that focuses, let's say, on the brands. So Chanel, Louis Vuitton in this case. If you focus only on that, you miss the nuance of whether that example and that keyword is being talked about in a positive way or in a negative way. So we actually found a specific example where there was a piece of content that was talking about Louis Vuitton as the main element of the content, let's say, but it was about a store robbery that happened. And there was another article that was talking also about Louis Vuitton, but it was talking about Louis Vuitton in the Paris Fashion Week, right? So that nuance of the context, as I was saying, human-like context, is very important, and our system is able to identify whether one is, as I was saying, desirable for the brand or not. And we have many examples of this, especially with keyword blocking, right? So a very common practice is to try to avoid words like death, words like killing, etc., etc. And we found multiple examples with content talking about, for example, the death of the cookie. Is using the word death, but not in such a negative way, or the word gun is used in marathon related content to signal the start of the race. So being able to go beyond the specific keywords and the specific phrases and into the overall article allows us to bring more accuracy at scale, which is the main thing in the end.
Yeah, it's the examples are endless in terms of that. Like an apple, apple pie, very simple. That Apple doesn't necessarily want to be in the same mentions of that, right? It's a very innocent example, but there is a lot of restriction that blocks actual scale, right?
And
So
going back to what I was saying before, the languages in the end are also a core issue we're trying to solve, and especially for brands that or agencies, I would say, that manage budgets across multiple markets centrally. This is also language agnostic. So this brand blueprint that you see here, this piece of a brand blueprint, it would work regardless of the language of the content. So if there's content in Polish, in German, in Danish, and in Spanish, or in Swahili, it would all be matched. And that is a very, very powerful tool to first ensure that consistency across all of your markets, but also make sure that you have coverage in some markets where maybe your existing vendor is not so strong at.
Yeah. So if someone is just getting started, how should they think about activating all contextual targeting, right? Like in their media plans today, or like where do you begin when it comes to not maybe also legacy targeting, but also looking into some of the new things? What are some of the thoughts you have to do or things you have to think about in the team when you think about a big brand?
So I think there's an effort needed when it comes to almost translating the existing thinking. I think we still in the digital space default to demographic targeting, right? Like male 18 to 44. And there's a translation that needs to happen there in terms of what type of content are these demographics usually interested in, what type of topics, what type of articles. That first layer of translation is super important because the reason why you're interested in a certain demographic is not because of their demographic, it's because of their behavior, right?
Yeah.
It's because of their interest. So translating that, being able to translate that into content, and then also thinking about it, right? Because I think a lot of brands maybe haven't had that explicit effort of thinking where does a brand fit the most. Maybe they've thought about brand safety. I think most of the big ones have thought about brand safety. And this is what I was saying, moving from what is acceptable to what is desirable, right?
Yeah.
So this opens up a lot of possibilities, especially with bigger publishers, where maybe if you're overly cautious with brand safety, you move away from news outlets just because news these days aren't pleasant to read. But a lot of those news publishers have sports section, they have finance section, they have lifestyle section. So blocking a whole domain or allowing a whole domain even is it can be very risky, and this is a tool that allows you to apply that at a granular level. So just to sum up, think of how do you translate your current strategy, especially from demographic into content, and then also have that grander picture of what are the main characteristics of content that would make content desirable to your brand.
Yeah, and this goes into the scale, right? Because how can AI-driven targeting really deliver results across languages and markets, right? There are some limitations, but do they negate each other? How do you think about that? Because this will still limit a lot of the inventory, right? We've seen some examples, but how do you think about mass targeting versus focused targets, moment targeting?
Yeah, I think limiting it's funny one because limiting inventory sometimes is looked at as a bad thing, but that's exactly what targeting is supposed to be, right? If you had a targeting strategy and it allowed 90% of inventory available, then you're not really doing targeting, right? You're protecting yourself from certain things. So it's really about finding what are the most relevant places and times to show your ad and reducing wastage in the end. So it's a much more focused way of spending your budget. Yes, it will be a bit more expensive because again, in programmatic, you have to bid higher to make sure that you will win that particular auction. But that's what programmatic ended up bringing, right? When we moved from that early stage of no targeting to behavioral targeting, the audiences were very, very small, but they were very, very relevant, right? So you would maybe even spend the same amount of budget that you would in open market, but it would be much more narrowly dedicated to the right people and now the right time, and that ends up yielding high relevance and better results.
Yeah, awesome. So we reached the end of the presentation. So now it's time to actually see if there's any questions in here. We have 4 minutes left, so maybe there are some good questions that we can see. I missed that a lot of people are saying good morning, so good morning. So if you have any questions, throw it in here. I'll throw out another poll as well. So while people are thinking, I'll add one more poll just to see what people's next steps are in terms of this. So we can put that in as well. So yeah, open up to the floor. There are no stupid questions, as I always say. So if there's anything, let us know. That just means that we answered everything very, very much in depth.
This is what you get when you do it on a Monday morning.
Yeah, the coffee is needed. Good. So we still see that there are some that want to build a contextual strategy for 26, talk to partner platforms. So yes, if you talk to a platform, use one of the 3 mentioned. No, I think it's important to dig deeper in this. What's possible, what's not possible, right? I think there are some limitations for everyone, but really just thinking about the strategy, as you said, like what is our actually content strategy for this? Not just looking at demographics, which I love this picture of King Charles and Ozzy Osbourne that has the exact same demographic number, right? Same age, same location, all those things, but it's widely different what their interests are and what their, where you want to hit them and how you want to hit them, right? So
I see there's a question. How do you find the right person? Which data of user is used to match with AI? And so going back to where I was talking about the 3 pillars, I guess, of advertising, which are right ad, right person, right time. The topic of today was focusing on the right time. So it's not a replacement of behavioral targeting, of user-based targeting, but it's more complementary to make sure that you reach the right user at the right time. So the solution that we're presenting, that we're talking about today, is focusing on the content of the website. So that's essentially the matching criteria. So, if you open an article which has, 2, 3 banners, the content of the article is what is being evaluated against the client's requirement and classified into whether it matches or not. So any user-based strategy that you may have, you can still do, is still, relevant, but this solution is focusing more on the contextual piece.
Thank you. So we have 50 seconds left. Quick fire round. Yes, Shannon, good question.
Would this replace IAB targeting or add to it? This is a great question because a lot of platforms, when they do IAB category targeting, they do it at the top level domain. And so if you take bbc.com or bbc.uk, it will be classified as news, sports, finance, lifestyle, right? Because they have all of this myriad of content. Our solution, the benefit of it is that it goes at the specific content level. So regardless of the main intention of the parent publisher, we classify that particular piece of content. So even if you want to do IAB-based targeting, so category-based targeting, it's able to find it at a much granular level. So imagine, you have a publisher called cars.com. Imagine most content probably about cars. If they publish an article about financing of cars, but specifically talking about financing, that article would be classified as finance or home finance related instead of cars, right? So it's not a replacement, but rather I would say an enhancement to make sure that you find it at a much more granular level.
So do we. Perfect. I think that's time for everyone. The slides, I was about to say, the presentation will be shared in everyone's inbox afterwards. So even those who missed it, they will get it. And yeah, you can always reach out. If there's anything, there's plenty of fun stuff. And we'll, of course, also have more things on our website if you want to go in and dig a little bit deeper onto that. So thank you, Marcel. And thanks, everyone, for participating. We had a great turnout. It's amazing. Appreciate it. So have an amazing Monday.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.